Hello everybody, hope you're doing well and thanks for joining us for another video. Now, the other week I had a debate with Flatzoid about whether or not we'd fake the 24-hour sun in Antarctica. Granted, it wasn't really much of a debate because we didn't fake it, and it was clear from listening to some of his streams beforehand that all of the arguments that they had were pretty much all based on either not having all the information or working off incorrect information. So I was happy to not push Flatzoid for explanations about how we faked it. I felt I'd give him the benefit of the doubt and let him have whatever information he wanted and see what he did with it. So instead, I just told him I was an open book. He could ask whatever questions he wanted about the trip because I've got nothing to hide. Don't worry though, he still thinks we faked it, and he's apparently currently putting together some videos that will explain how we did fake it. So once he's published them, I'll set about showing why his ideas don't actually work. But this video isn't specifically about Flatzoid. You see, in preparation for that discussion, I'd skimmed over some of his recent live streams about the final experiment to try and get an idea of what sorts of points he was likely to ask about so that I could make sure I had the relevant footage easily to hand in order to answer it. Now, whenever Flatzoid live streams, he's typically not by himself. Instead, he's joined by several people, and usually the same faces make appearances. One in particular is someone also called Dave, but goes by his channel name Soul Unchained Mind. You may be familiar with Sovereign Soul if you watch Jaren's streams because he regularly appeared on those, particularly the Reefer Roulette streams. Although, I don't think Sov is going to be appearing on Jaren's streams anytime soon, post-Antarctica, because Sov has been very vocal about aspects of our trip that to him don't make any sense and that he claims we are lying about. So let's go over these alarming red flags that Sovereign Soul has seemingly found, starting with his claims about the dates of the trip.
He said, we flew out early on the 17th. Again, very adamant about this, but we have to look at what makes sense. Okay, so what if, you mean to tell me people could have showed up down there to get ready to leave on the 18th to go to Antarctica on their paid expedition? So these people went down there and they're like, what the you mean the plane left yesterday? Or they're going to fly an entire extra flight in? No, that's not.
I'm not entirely sure what motive he thinks we'd have for lying about that, but Flatzoid did raise some of those questions to me during the discussion, and I tried my best to address them.
Were you guys scheduled to leave on the 18th or the 17th?
So the original schedule, the plan was from the outset that we were flying out on the 14th and flying back on the 18th, but ALE made it clear to us from the outset that is very weather dependent. I woke up at about just before midday on the 16th, and I think it was Mark Herman had passed the message on to me that they'd said there's weather closing in, so that they'd made the decision that they were going to try and fly us out on the 17th. We were all quite happy with that. We'd rather be not snowed in.
However, the other day I was then watching the Drunk Debunks show, and he was on a live stream. He went onto Flatzoid's server, first to chat to Flatzoid and then to the rest of the panel. And Sovereign Soul was there. And he was raising the same basic claims and suggesting we were trying to hide something.
The next flight in was with the new people that were going to come in on the 18th. Now, they said that they left on the 17th, that the plane was coming early. I said that the plane came in earlier on the 18th and not the 17th.
Now, as I covered in my very first TFE video back in June last year, the planned dates of the trip were flying from Chile to Union Glacier on the 14th of December, staying in Antarctica for 4 days, and then flying back to Chile on the 18th of December. We'll be there from the 14th to the 18th of December. And ALE suggests that we book our personal flights to and from Chile to be 2 to 3 days either side of the expedition date, just to avoid any risks of potentially missing flights. And the way that ALE flights work is they have a single Boeing 757 passenger aircraft, which they charter from Iceland Air for a few months each year, and it is stationed at Punta Arenas. it makes single round trips every few days to Union Glacier and back. So it brings a group of new passengers in on the inbound flight to Union Glacier and then flies back with the outbound passengers who've just finished their trip. For example, on the 12th of December, they flew out with a plane full of people who were taking part in the ice marathon. They ran the marathon on the 13th and then flew back on the 14th. So we flew over in a pretty empty plane, got offloaded at Union Glacier, and then the marathon runners boarded that same plane to fly back to Chile. Then we were supposed to fly back on the 18th, and the plane would have been bringing new visitors with it to pick us up. When I got up on the 16th, I was told that there was some potential bad weather closing in, and the ALE had made the decision to move the flight forward one day, so we would be departing on the 17th instead. Sovereign Soul, however, doesn't buy that. He seems to think that they wouldn't change the date, only the time.
Now, they said that they left on the 17th, that the plane was coming early. I said that the plane came in earlier on the 18th and not the 17th.
Now, I'm sure I saw Sovereign on one of the previous streams suggest that to Flatsoid that he should press us on this dates issue, because he seems to think it's some big got you moment and that all we'd have to do to settle this is show the stamps in our passports.
So if you did go back on the 17th, you should be able to show a passport stamp that says that you arrived in Chile on the 17th. Or they're going to fly an entire extra flight in? No, that's not how this thing works, man. It doesn't. So I need to see that passport stamp.
Which is why I had my passport in front of me ready for when Flatsoid asked me about it. I went on to show the stamps in my passport. Unfortunately, Sovereign's idea misses one key aspect. Chilean border control only stamps your passport when you either enter or exit Chilean territory, and Union Glacier falls under Chilean territory. So we didn't have our passport stamps when we flew to and from Antarctica, in the same way that we didn't have them stamped when we flew both ways between Punta Arenas and Santiago. My passport was stamped at Santiago on the 10th, because I was entering Chilean territory, and then stamped again in Santiago on the 20th because I was then leaving Chilean territory. Although I do also have a stamp in my passport for Antarctica. And they also brought up the fact that ALE had posted on their Facebook page on the 17th of December talking about a Chilean Navy P-3 Orion aircraft making its first ever landing at Union Glacier.
And then we get here to this, and it says, on December the 17th, history in the making. ALE is proud to support the Chilean Navy's first landing of a P-3 Orion aircraft, and no mention by ALE of them. Mm-hmm. Right here, we're in.
When did the people go back from TFE? Also the 17th, correct?
Yeah,
I think it's.
And we go back the day before that, the 17th, they were there. Now that airstrip, as the woman in the video Lowry was showing, said that it was 8 kilometers to the airstrip from where they were at, which works out to be 5 miles. We're 5 miles from the camp itself, and I'm wondering why nobody was interested in this.
Ain't nobody trying to take their shirt off either to take a picture.
I said that the plane came in earlier on the 18th and not the 17th. Because on the 17th, according to the ALE Facebook page, there was a historic landing of a P-3 Orion aircraft from the Chilean Navy that landed on the Blue Ice runway. Now, this is a great big 4-engine, prop-driven, 20-something crew aircraft.
Again, I'm not entirely sure what point they think this is raising, because the weather on the 17th was okay for landing. That's how the 757 managed to get there to pick us up in the first place. And just because ALE posted about it on social media on the 17th does not mean that the event actually happened on the 17th. Less than 2 minutes it took me of Google searching the words Union Glacier P-3 Orion to find several social media posts about the event, one of which was on Twitter from a page called Cascade Aerospace, which had a picture of the P-3 Orion on the Blue Ice runway, and it was posted on the 11th of December. I think probably a better way to prove that our flight was actually moved to the 17th would instead perhaps be to look at the photos and videos that I took outside of the plane as we were boarding. Those were dated on the camera as being taken on the 17th. Or perhaps the photos of the mountains that I took just after takeoff, also dated on the 17th. Although granted, Sovereign doesn't have access to those and seemingly never thought to ask. Alternatively, you could look at Flight Radar 24, because they have a track of that plane flying to Antarctica and back again on the 17th, including a full downloadable log of all of the GPS tracking information for the aircraft, also dated on the 17th. On the last night, ALE even put a little champagne reception on for us and gave each of us a certificate to mark our time there, and they dated it 14th to the 17th of December. Unless he's confused by the logistics side of it and thinks that ALE would not bring their own flight forward a day. Well, here is a photo of the notice board that their staff put up in the tent for us, informing us about the change in schedule of the flight due to the weather. Bear in mind, this is a chartered plane, not a routine scheduled flight. For those few months of the year, the plane has no other commitments other than flying the route back and forth to Union Glacier. It can fly whenever they want it to. It's not like a bus service where the times on the bus stop are when the bus arrives, and that is it. It's more like having a private limousine. If plans change and the transport time needs to be moved, it can be. Now, I had seen some mention from the people in his streams about the weather not seeming that bad, and that it was summer, so they don't buy that the weather would be bad enough to move the flight.
So I also have the question of, if there's an incoming storm and it doesn't snow in Antarctica for the last 100 fucking years, then what kind of storm was it? The departure and arrival times on the regularly scheduled day. Let's not forget, it's summer. There's not going to be big fucking snowstorms and shit like that happening in the summer. Come on.
Overlooking, Antarctica is not a typical suburban region. I highlighted well before the trip, everything about it is very weather dependent. We didn't know what time we would be flying out from Punta Arenas on the 14th until the evening before we flew, because the flight times are decided by the pilots, who base it on the latest possible weather reports. While we were there, we had the scenic flight around the mountains. Again, from the outset, the staff made it very clear that that flight would be entirely weather dependent. The time might have to change, the date might have to change, it might not happen at all. As for the weather appearing fine and that it was summer, the weather in Antarctica can seemingly change very quickly. I was talking to Scott, one of the staff members at Halfway Point, and he was explaining how the mountain range that the camp was based in is essentially surrounded in all directions by then hundreds of miles of nothing. Literally ice shelves, pretty much all the way back to the coast, with nothing to block the weather. Now, if you think about when you go to the coast, it's typically windier there on average because you're exposed to open ocean. Whereas if you travel 10 or 15 miles inland, the weather is usually a lot calmer because you've got 10 or 15 miles of buildings and such obstructing the wind. Union Glacier doesn't have that. In fact, the camp at Union Glacier is placed in that specific area near the base of Mount Rossman because of how sheltered it is. The camp is about 6 miles from the Blue Ice runway. When we first landed and got out of the plane, there was a very noticeable wind blowing. Yet, just a short drive to the camp and the air was still, not even a hint of a breeze.
You'll notice just outside
When we later went to Halfway Point, which is less than 1.5 miles from the camp as the crow flies, there was a slight breeze rippling through, which made it feel colder than it was at the main camp. So just that short distance actually sees a pickup in the wind. Then, on the 16th, after we'd finished at halfway point, we did the scenic flight around the Ellsworth Mountains, during which time ALE's cargo plane landed at the Blue Ice runway. Once we were back at camp, Scott offered to drive us up to the runway to watch the cargo plane take off, which most of us chose to do. After that, Scott then carried on driving us out up the glacier to a point, I think it was about 12 miles from the camp, where we then went walking over ice hills. And I'm just going to let the videos tell you what the wind was like. Now, those videos were shot at 9 p.m. GMT. Within an hour, we were back at the main camp, and I shot this video at 10 p.m. GMT. The point is that very quickly, as you get away from the main camp, the wind can increase significantly. Even when you've got clear blue skies and the sun beating down on you, the wind can be extremely strong. And when it comes to landing a plane, strong winds can often cause problems. It is not a rare occurrence during strong winds to see planes attempting to land and then aborting to circle around and try again. And when they do land, they're often skewed compared to the center line of the runway. Not normally an issue on a typical runway because it's quite easy to change the direction of the plane, but that's on tarmac, not on ice. The ice runway has pretty much no grip to it. Critical Thing took one step on it and wound up on his back looking at the sky. It was the same ice that we went walking on up in the hills afterwards, and we needed spikes putting onto our boots in order to get any grip to be able to walk. So if they tried landing in strong winds, particularly any side winds, and they didn't touch down perfectly straight on the runway, they'd have probably found themselves going straight off of the runway. So I would personally rather leave a day early than risk that. Now, of course, I would have preferred to have had the fourth day in ideal conditions. But by the late hours of the 16th, the clouds were rolling in, regularly blocking the sun. The wind had picked up a lot, even at the main camp itself. I mean, I took some B-roll footage during that time, and you can see the flags in the background are being blown around like crazy. The wind was so strong driving into us that I wound up putting on my balaclava and ski goggles just to keep my skin covered up. It was not the most pleasant experience. Fun little side note, this video clip is actually something that I got MC Toon to record of me for an idea that I had about a separate video entirely debunking moon landing conspiracies. This footage was actually shot just before 4 a.m. UTC time, which is about 1 o'clock in the morning in Antarctica. That puts it about 2 hours before solar midnight, which is the point where the sun reaches its lowest elevation in the sky. And yet, even here, it's still nowhere near the horizon and nowhere near setting. Now, if the weather did turn bad enough that it prevented the plane from landing on the 18th, there's no saying how long we'd have been delayed for. Could have potentially been 2 or 3 days. And likely, the moment that the weather looked like it was going clear enough to land, they would have sent the plane out for us. By that point, we'd already done everything that we wanted to do anyway. We'd captured the 360 footage, we'd done the sunspots, we'd done the live streams, we'd done the scenic flight, and we got taken out around the glacier in a truck that I wasn't even expecting. So had they instead left us there until the weather cleared, we'd have just been pretty much stuck at the camp with nothing to do apart from sitting in tents while the weather outside was awful. And then also left with the distinct possibility that we couldn't get back to Punta Arenas in time for our return flights, which would have then meant having to arrange other flights on a later date. And being that close to Christmas, I would sooner lose 1 day in Antarctica than risk not getting back to my family in time for Christmas. However, Flatsoid then queried, as we were back in Chile a day early, what did we do on the 18th?
And then the other thing that also asking the whole time is, what did you guys do on the 18th?
We were back in Punta Arenas, so we were just pretty
rested.
much. Yeah, I mean, we didn't really have anything planned anyway. It was just they told us we needed to stay a couple of days afterwards, just in case there was delays getting back. So I can't even remember exactly what I did apart from trying to sleep. Yeah, it was pretty much just a case of trying to relax and get my body clock back into some sort of order, because
it seems Sovereign wasn't happy with that answer, though.
I wish you would have pressed him more on that time and say, now, wait a minute, hold on. You got in there early on the 17th, right? You got time to sleep in on the 18th. You're going to be there an entire extra day that you would have been in Antarctica. Where's any kind of accountability for that time period? What did you do during that time period? You can't tell me that you slept and shit that whole time. You just sat in a hotel room. You're in another country you've never been to before. You had a whole day, maybe two, to kill in Puentes Arenas. Why not any video of like, hey, let's go around the town here and maybe we'll look at some of the shops and stuff. And I've never been to a Chilean shop or a Chilean restaurant before. Maybe we could try some of that. Now, if they did indeed leave on the 17th, what did you do all day? Where's any proof of your arrival on the 17th, a day early? What did you do all day the 18th? You have an entire day to kill in a country that you've never been to before. Your viewers would most likely be interested in, hey, let's go around town or something. Let's kill some time.
Firstly, I love how he talks about us being in this new country and why didn't we go and explore the area? He seemingly forgot that we'd spent 3 days there before we flew to Antarctica. And Punta Arenas is not exactly a big place, nor is it a very tourist-focused place. By that point, I'd been on the go for about 5 or 6 days, and I'd amassed the sum total of about 12 hours of sleep. So, yeah, I was not particularly bothered about walking around a town that I'd already walked around, seeing the sights that I'd already seen. In actuality, the 18th, for at least some of us, was trying to sort through the massive amount of footage and photos that we'd captured in the days prior. Will, Toon, Critical Thinker, myself spent several hours sat in part of the hotel restaurant with our laptops backing up all the footage. I edited some of the photos that I took. I rendered up the Insta360 time lapses from Halfway Point, as well as the flight from Punta Arenas to Union Glacier. I then uploaded and published that flight video to YouTube on the 18th. Toon and Critical Think also published their footage from that flight on that day as well. Then in that evening, we'd gone out for dinner, and when we got back, Toon and myself ended up going back into that same room in the restaurant, doing a live stream that started just after midnight and ran through till sunrise. See, typically if you ask someone what they did on a particular day of a holiday, usually they will either talk about a particular trip that they went on or a place that they went and visited, else they might just say, we stayed at the hotel. And usually people can figure out for themselves that that entails being around the grounds of the hotel, hanging around the pool and stuff, not sitting in your hotel room. I mean, with hindsight, I probably should have been more specific. Perhaps Sov would also like a log of our bowel movements as well, so that he can check that none of those timings seem sus either. And another one of my explanations that he wasn't buying was the hilarious Masonic boot claims. So, as I've explained in a previous video, batteries notoriously do not like cold weather. So I'd put my battery packs that were powering the camera gear into one of the polar boots that was provided for us, because the weather at Halfway Point was mild enough that I didn't need those boots. My walking boots were fine, and I figured that the batteries would be better off inside the boot, off the floor, surrounded by insulation with some chemical hand warmers inside and the insulated cover of my water bottle covering the top of it, trying to keep them warm rather than just leaving them lying on the ice. And the black of the boot would also absorb heat from the sun. all just in an attempt to try and at least reduce the impact that the cold temperature had as much as possible. But it meant that my setup had 2 tripods, a solar panel, and then just a load of wires running into a boot. So I wanted to explain on my live stream about the setup, and I thought it would be beneficial to at least explain the boot, and I wanted to show people the amount of insulation that was inside them. So, in preparation, rather than having to walk off in the middle of the stream to find the boot, I just placed that spare boot under the table where I was going to be streaming from. Now, the spare boot happened to be the left boot because the right boot was the one I was using for the battery packs. But apparently, there's some sort of Masonic ritual that involves removing your left shoe. So, apparently, removing your left shoe is now the same as putting a left boot that you weren't actually wearing under a table, and that makes me a Mason, apparently. But after the discussion, Sov weighed in and took issue with my explanation.
Do I really buy the Mason thing, though?
Of course not. It's always something. It's so you can easily.
Well, here's the bottom line to it. Anybody with a brain in their damn head would know this. The boot's not going to keep your battery warm. Okay? The only reason that the boot is warm with your foot in it is because it keeps the heat from your feet from escaping through the boot.
Mm-hmm.
No other reason. If you don't believe me, go set your boots out on the doorstep tonight. If you live up here in the north where I live, put your boots out there on the porch overnight, and then go put them on in the morning. See how toasty warm they are inside.
Now, I completely agree with his analogy. However, there are 2 slight flaws to his logic. I mean, I too would not leave boots outside overnight because they would go cold. But they go cold overnight because the sun stops heating up the environment, and so heat is then free to escape without being replaced, which causes the temperature to drop. But he seems to have forgot we were under a 24-hour sun that didn't set, so the boot was constantly in sunlight. And flaw number 2 is, like he points out, the insulation of the boot contains heat that is generated in the boot and stops it from escaping. But he's overlooking that batteries are not 100% efficient. They generate heat as they discharge, so any heat that the battery packs generate will get trapped inside the boot rather than just freely escaping into the surrounding air. And finally, during the Drunk Debunk stream, he called them science deniers, and they took issue with that, claiming they weren't.
Yeah. Why do you think we deny science? What about science that we deny?
Well, you think that the Earth is flat.
It has nothing to do with science, sir.
It does. It 100% does.
No, it doesn't.
So what field of science does it not have anything to do with?
Well,
science has everything to do with it.
So I super chatted him to point out that 7 months ago, Sovereign Soul said this.
But I was thinking, when you're in that place, regardless of whether you're on a globe or whether you're on a flat, you are going to be south of the Tropic of Capricorn. You're going to be south of the furthest zenith position that the sun makes. So you are going to have to look north to see the sun. And it would be real simple that as it traverses to the west, if it arcs in a west by northwesterly direction at all, you're not on a globe. If it arcs around, if it starts to track, you don't even have to see it for 24 hours. All you have to do is watch which way it tracks. If it goes west by northwest, you're going to be on, you're on a flat Earth. If it's going past you in a west by southwest direction, in other words, angling off to this way, arcing around you, then you're definitely on a globe. So I don't even think it would be necessary to see it for 24 hours just to track that little bit of arc. What do you think about that?
And he's absolutely right. I've pointed this out before. We'd basically disproven flat Earth before we even left Chile, because we were south of the Tropic of Capricorn. Yet, we watched the sun rise southeast of us, circle around to the north of us, and then carry on round and set southwest. The exact same observations can be made in South Africa and Australia. And for people at similar latitudes in the northern hemisphere during the northern summer, we see the sun rise northeast of us, circle around to the south, and set northwest of us. A perfect match for a globe, but not possible on a flat surface. However, Sovereign's response once he was reminded of this claim.
Dave McKeegan for $5 says, Sov is on record talking to Will Duffy saying, if the sunrise sunset is south of us in Chile, then the Earth is a globe. Thinking face.
Yeah, early on when I was talking to him about that, I said that would mean that we're on a globe, right? And as I thought on it further, I was like, no, that wouldn't mean that at all, because that would mean you'd have to shit can no proof of convexity, all of the other mountains of evidence. So what I concluded was that if there was a 24-hour sun seen in the south, that would mean that there is either an anomaly with the sun that we don't understand, or there is some folly afoot. And as we found, there was the latter. So what?
Oh, he was so close. It's as if he'd had a moment of clarity when speaking to Will. He actually managed to have a solid, logical prediction that would falsify one of the models either which way. Unfortunately, the moment the observation didn't match his prediction, off went the goalposts. I mean, if they want to talk about red flags and things being suspicious, it's a red flag to me that a flat earther seemingly completely forgot about all these aspects of the globe that apparently don't work when they formed this complete prediction that, by their own admission, would categorically prove the Earth is a globe. And his own prediction of the path of the sun in Chile disproved his own claims of flat Earth. Now, when that happens in science and an observation does not match your prediction, then you change the concepts that you used to create that prediction. Yet, so far, in the more than a month since those observations destroyed Sovereign's concepts, he's seemingly done nothing to change his views of the world to account for said observations. Instead, he seems to be trying to ignore those observations and not account and explain for them, which is also known as denying science. So, perhaps collectively they should stop obsessing over trying to come up with ridiculously imaginative ways that we apparently faked the 24-hour sun in Antarctica, and worry more about showing and explaining the much easier observations of the sun being further beyond the tropics than any current flat Earth explanations can account for. But I think we all know that's not going to happen. So, instead, I'm going to look forward to seeing Flatsoid's finished explanations for how he thinks we faked the 24-hour sun using Unreal Engine so that I can debunk that lot into the middle of next week. For now, though, that's going to be it for this video. As always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video and you haven't already done so, then please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video.